As diplomacy and military escalations increasingly unfold side by side, the world appears to be entering a new phase of uncertainty. In the Middle East, the US-mediated Lebanon-Israel security talks have concluded on a constructive note, even as Israeli strikes, Hezbollah operations and border tensions continue. The key question is whether diplomacy can contain escalations or merely manage it. At the same time, a major debate is reshaping transatlantic security. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has renewed pressure on NATO allies to increase defense spending, warning that countries failing to do so could face changes in Washington's approach to security cooperation. Today, we examine these two critical stories and what they reveal about the future of regional stability, alliances, and global security in an increasingly uncertain world. I'm Rehan Morsi, and this is In Focus. Israeli troops push deeper into southern Lebanon, entering new areas beyond the Litani River as airstrikes and clashes with Hezbollah intensified. According to the Washington Post, the military escalations coincided with rare direct talks between Lebanese and Israeli military officials at the Pentagon, hosted by the United States, aimed at reinforcing a fragile ceasefire and exploring longer-term security arrangements. Lebanon sought stronger guarantees to halt Israeli operations and secure troop withdrawal, while Israel continued to target what it described as Hezbollah infrastructure. The talks highlighted Washington's efforts to prevent a wider regional conflict, but ongoing fighting underscored the gap between diplomacy and realities on the ground. Despite continued military escalation along the Lebanon-Israel border, the latest U.S.-mediated security talks have concluded on what officials describe as a constructive note. The discussions focused on Israeli withdrawal from the disputed areas, implementation of the UN Resolution 1701, border security, and the future role of Hezbollah. Yet, as negotiations continue to do so, military operations raising questions about whether diplomacy can deliver lasting stability or simply prevent a wider regional war. To discuss the latest developments, we're joined from Beirut by Munir Shahida, a former Lebanese government coordinator with UNIFIL. Good morning, sir, and thank you for joining us here on In Focus. Let's start off by asking about the latest talks. They were described as constructive despite the ongoing Israeli strikes and the Hezbollah operations. How should we interpret these apparent contradictions between diplomacy and escalation, given the intensification and the capture, for instance, of the Beer Fort Castle in Lebanon?
Good morning to everyone. Actually, the negotiations that have happened and are still happening between the two delegations, the Israeli and Lebanese delegation. Actually, Lebanon hasn't gotten anything out of it. They should have conditioned these negotiations or have it conditioned by a ceasefire, but going to the negotiations while there is no ceasefire in place, then they're just making it easier for Israel, basically. And now Israel is actually thinking that it is right. They said that they will not be withdrawing from the areas that they have taken over. They will not stop the hostilities, and they want Hezbollah to disarm. And so this is the mistake that the Lebanese government has made. They didn't put any conditions for us to go to the negotiations, and so now that there are no conditions, this is a pre-set laws actually, and yeah, it is Israel is right now to set the conditions that they have set.
Okay, so given what you just said there, you don't really think there's a big breakthrough or major breakthrough between the Lebanese-Israeli conversations or talks there, and that the Israelis will continue to move deeper into the Lebanese territory and capture more and more land?
It is very clear what Israel has been doing in the whole region, and not just Lebanon, makes it clear. There was this agreement in Gaza that was brokered by the US and some Arab countries. They did not implement it. Now, or then in Syria and now in Lebanon, and so Israel does not respect or implement any of the agreements that it signs. They just go to the negotiations to impose their conditions, but they never implement any of the conditions imposed on them. And as you know, the Lebanese delegation now doesn't have any kind of leverage or pressure on Israel, and the only thing that they have actually gotten out of these negotiations is that there is US pressure on Israel so that the atrocities and the strikes don't include Beirut and the neighboring cities. And so Israel did that, but they've been pushing deeper and taking over more towns in the south. And now there is a larger number of displaced people. They've actually also taken over Nabatea, and so how can both sides negotiate when one of them is under fire?
Well, sir, despite the fact that you said that they have not gone into these negotiations with preconditions, there have been a number of statements out in the media where Lebanon is insisting that the Israelis completely withdraw from Lebanese territory and hand over these captured areas, allow the displaced people to go back to their homes. Are these objectives achievable given the negotiating process or given what's happening as well on the ground?
Yes, the Lebanese delegation has clear conditions, which is Israeli withdrawal, stopping the atrocities, and handing over the detainees. But Israel has refused all of these conditions, and they told them to disarm the resistance and that they will not be withdrawing as long as there is some kind of threat. And we all know what a threat is for Israel. They are just making this up. They keep making up pretexts so that they can strike whenever and wherever. And this is happening in other countries, actually, and not just in Lebanon. And so this is some kind of a new reality that Israel has imposed under fire. But everything that's been happening in Lebanon now, or all the updates now, is that Beirut is safe now from any strikes because of the US pressure on Israel. But other than this, Israel won't be implementing any other conditions.
Well, sir, we're seeing on our screens right now images of the latest bombing by the Israelis in the south of Lebanon. It seems that despite these negotiating process or attempts to find some sort of resolution to the conflict, the Israelis are still pushing forward. Is there any hope of finding a resolution to this conflict if the Israelis continue to expand their operations in the south?
Actually, what Israel has been doing in southern Lebanon is that they are punishing the resistance members, and this was actually said by Ben Gvir and Smotrich themselves. And so if these extremist officials, if they are extremist officials, then maybe we can ignore what they said. But then also their prime minister, all of them have been talking or saying that this is some kind of punishment. They said that they need to destroy buildings in southern Lebanon as a response to the drones, and so they are punishing them and not just attacking their infrastructure. And they have been doing this for more than a year now, saying that they are attacking Hezbollah's infrastructure, but actually this is not the case. It's not just because they feel threatened by Hezbollah, it is rather a punishment. And so we don't know if we'll reach an agreement, especially with the scenario that's been happening now, the strikes from both sides. And now also they're talking to, or they're waiting actually to see what's going to happen or what's going to come out of the talks between Iran and the US.
Well, thank you so much, sir, for joining us this morning, and thank you for your take on what's happening in Lebanon. Munir Shahida, thank you so much for joining us and your insights as well as your analysis. While diplomacy in the Middle East seeks to contain regional tensions, another strategic debate is unfolding across the Atlantic, one that could redefine the future of Western security architecture. The question there is not how to end the conflict, but who should pay for deterrence, who should shoulder the burden of collective defense, and how long the United States is willing to remain the primary guarantor of European security. Now, the U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has urged America's Asian allies to significantly increase defense spending, warning that the U.S. will no longer tolerate freeloading on its security guarantees, according to the Telegraph. Speaking at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, Hegseth says China's rapid military expansion poses a growing challenge to regional stability and called for a stronger, more self-reliant network of partners to deter aggression. He argued that allies should raise defense budgets while the U.S. continues investing heavily in its own military capabilities. Hegseth stressed that Washington remains committed to the Indo-Pacific but expects partners to share a greater portion of the security burden in countering Beijing's influence and preserving the regional balance of power. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has renewed pressure on NATO allies to increase defense spending, warning that countries failing to do so could face changes in Washington's approach to security cooperation. His remarks reflect a broader U.S. push for greater burden sharing within NATO as Washington shifts more attention towards China and the Indo-Pacific. The debate comes at a critical time for the alliance amid the war in Ukraine, concerns about Russia, and the growing questions over the future of American military commitments to Europe. To discuss these developments, we're joined from London by Babak Emamian, a political analyst. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on In Focus. Sir, let's start off here by asking you, how significant is Hegseth's latest warning to NATO? Does it represent a continuation of existing policy or more of a fundamental shift when it comes to U.S. strategy with NATO allies?
Well, good morning to you, and thank you for your question. Obviously, it's a big shift right now. And what War Secretary Hegseth was mentioning was that there should be a new definition for defense alliances. Especially, he mentioned that in his view, a lot of defense alliances are formed in order for some countries to outsource their defense to others. It's a form of, and he didn't go as far as saying cheating, but it's rather these countries, instead of spending enough on their defense, by forming an alliance, in the name of forming an alliance, what they are doing is outsourcing their defense to others. And this practice has to be stopped. That's what he said. Mm-hmm. And especially he mentioned NATO. Not every country in NATO is paying what they should be paying towards their defense. The other thing he also mentioned, which is very important, that the definition of defense has to be changed. A lot of countries have adopted the defensive postures, but he's saying that they should have offensive postures and mostly a deterrence in order to stop the war. But in the last 30 years, since the collapse of Soviet Union, a lot of countries have cut back on their defense and taken this defensive posture, defensive strategy instead of offensive strategy. And we see that very much in US-Iran war, where countries like Iran regime has no hesitation attacking its neutral neighboring countries because they know they would not retaliate because the countries in the southern Gulf states have taken a defensive strategy.
Yes, we'll get back to the idea of the defensive and offensive there when it comes to the Europeans. But let's talk a bit about Trump's, push or the debate that he has said about the 2% spending. He wants to push that towards a 5% of GDP for European nations. Now, how realistic is this goal for European governments, given the shrinking of their economies in general? Can they afford to spend this much on defense?
Well, that's a great question. So the question is why they cannot afford it. For example, the European countries. The reason why the European countries cannot afford it because they have low growth economies. The average growth has been about 1% in the last 16 years, while inflation has been average on 3%. So these countries are going backwards instead of going forward. They are losing 2% per annum. And over 16 years compounded, it becomes 50% loss of earnings. And then we have to look at what is the cause of it. It's mostly on three bases. One is bad policies, policies like green policies, and globalization is destroying these countries. First of all, globalization is sending all the manufacturing jobs to China, and green policies is making energy extremely expensive. And once you have expensive energy, then it's not possible to have manufacturing and other industries in your place. Secondly, our weak leaders, due to various reasons, perhaps some is positive discrimination. Some people call it diversity. We are getting people who are not qualified, but they are in their position simply because of their ethnicity, their sex, whether they are female or male, from certain orientation or whatever. These people are getting to those positions. And thirdly, again, not concentrating whenever this issue of slow growth comes up. Nobody is concentrating on it. It's mostly on fringe policies. So these are the three things that right now they're losing, and that's why they cannot increase their defense spending to more than what they're paying, into 5%.
Well, I mean, I know you're not too hot on the idea of the European leaders there, but it seems that they are taking some sort of stand at the moment, despite the regression of the US involvement when it comes to NATO. They seem to be trying to work out their own way of defending themselves. We just recently saw Norway join France when it comes to the nuclear deterrence program there. And do you think this is going to be effective, I suppose, in defending European interests and Europe as a whole?
Well,
without NATO, that is.
Yes. I mean, when you say, I just want to go again back to what Pete Hegseth, U.S. War Secretary, said. He said that, and I again refer to Europeans. He was mentioning a lot about Europeans. They love to have conferences at different locations on different topics, but nothing comes out of it. For example, we've been hearing for the last 2 years that Europe should become more independent of US in terms of military technology. And for that, they need to come up immediately with something like $1 trillion, $1,000 billion. And it would take 10 years. We've heard that for the last 2 years. But nothing has happened. Nothing much has happened. Some on the fringes, some small deals are about 50 billion, but nothing more than that. And nobody is committing to it. On the other hand, when it comes to geopolitics, total mismanagement, whether it's Ukraine war, the Strait of Hormuz, and other. So, I mean, for example, France, they say we are Indo-Pacific power, we are there.
Yes.
But when it comes to Strait of Hormuz, they're nowhere. Same here with Britain and other European countries. So, there is a discrepancy between what they say and what they do.
Okay, well, given what you just said there, that the Americans do not necessarily view Europeans as a reliable ally at the moment, do you think that Washington's pressure on Europe is driven by concerns about China more than Russia? Or do you think it's related to, I suppose, a sense that they feel that the Europeans have failed them in other geopolitical aspects?
Well, on the issue of China is doing extremely well on its economy in the last 30 years. It has lifted something like 700 to 800 million people out of poverty. So they're extremely doing that. And in terms of, and they've achieved that through globalization, because most manufacturing jobs, whether in Europe or US, has gone there. And now President Trump is introducing reindustrialization. And he's asking Europeans also to introduce reindustrialization into Europe, which the Europeans are yet hesitant to do so. The issue is the first line of defense is economy. You need a strong economy to have a strong defense. And China economy is growing constantly, while a European economy is going backward, as I mentioned earlier. So they cannot afford to have a strong defense strategy. And that's what President Trump is saying. Unless you have a strong economy and you have a good policies for growing the economy, then you cannot have strong defense policies. And right now, with Europe dedicated to globalization and dedicated to green policies, the cost of energy is so high that they don't have a good economic policy. So the economy is not growing fast enough for them to be able to afford good defense policies.
But obviously, this is a warning as well from the Americans about spending here. Now, how do European leaders interpret, Pete Hegseth's warnings when it comes to the spending too little? They may possibly face a different U.S. approach when it comes to security cooperation. Is this something that the Europeans are afraid of?
Well, we mentioned earlier that the European, I said that, and that the European leaders are mainly weak. The reason why they are weak, because most of them are young and experienced, and they don't have the right team to lead them. And so when you ask the question, how they are reacting to this, they're not doing nothing, just more conferences, more talks. And I give you an example. In Britain, it's almost in the last 2 years, this intelligence services has been warning about the infiltration by Chinese into various institutions in United Kingdom, in Britain, whether it's the media, the education, in politics, but no action has been taken. Very little action has been taken, and very little coverage about this by the media itself. So when this topic about what Pete Hegseth has said and whether we should have a serious debate about this, no, there will not be much of a debate because the media won't talk about it, and also the politicians will not talk about it much either.
Well, sir, if I could, try to attempt at least to bring in the perspective of maybe some European leaders, is they feel that the Americans have abandoned them in their time of need when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And therefore, even if the Americans feel that they have also been let down by the Europeans, it's mutual, I suppose. Do you think this would be a fair assessment? And do you think that this is the reason why they don't necessarily want to be more involved when it comes to, strategic alliances militarily with the Americans?
Well, you cannot have peace. You cannot have prosperity without peace. It is very difficult to make money during the war. War is very expensive. And right now in Europe, we have a forever war. Ukraine war has become a forever war. It will go on for another 20 years easily. And it will cost Europe, it costs Europe right now about $100 billion a year. Yeah. And I'm sure the cost will increase. And as President Trump has said, in a couple of years, there will not be a Ukraine because something like 10 million people have already immigrated from Ukraine. Another 10 million has been involved in the war. So you lost almost half the population either through immigration or war, being involved in the war efforts. And the Europeans are not pursuing peace at all. They consider Russia as the greatest threat, while low-growth economy is the biggest threat to Europe, not Russia.
The thing is, sir, I'm sorry if I cut you off there, but understandably so, like the Americans may view this as less of an issue because it's across the Atlantic, but for the Europeans, it's next door. So this would be a debate for them. How does the ongoing war in Ukraine actually influence the current debates about burden sharing inside NATO and how they're going to deal with it? I know you're saying this could be a forever war, but I guess it's a make or break for many Europeans, especially those closer to Ukraine.
Well, again, I go back to what Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, has said. There are members in NATO who are not contributing anything, but they are costing the efforts because of their postures they take towards some countries. And and that is costing NATO. And I don't want to open that, but you mean what I mean. There are certain countries that are exaggerating the Russia threat in order to get more funding or just to make themselves more important. Russia has not even managed to get to Kiev. Yet they are saying Russia tomorrow will be in Berlin, will be in Paris, and will be in London, which is not true at all. It is not there. And there is no intention by Russians to be there. And they couldn't do that if they want to do that. And in order to invade Ukraine, Russia needs an army a size of 5 to 6 million. And the mass is not there. They can't get more than 1 million army never mind to get 5 million, and to invade the entire Europe, they need an army a size of 15 million. So when the maths is not there, I don't know why these countries make these, these allegations, these issues, make them these risks much higher, exaggerate these risks much higher than is necessary. The only reason they do it to become more important while they are very small countries. Otherwise, there is no such threat.
Okay, well, some reports are suggesting that the United States may reduce certain military assets available for European contingencies. Are the Europeans concerned about future American commitments, justified given what I just told you there about contingencies when it comes to European assets?
Well, in terms of defense, first of all, again, I go back that the idea of Russia invading NATO countries is very small. The risk of it is very small, and it won't happen. Russia is too busy with its own internal issues, and it's trying to become a fully capitalistic country. So it wants to become, and it's a very large country, and it has its own, again, its own issues with its population, where the provinces, the population are growing, and that would have a effect on the Russia demography, and that's an issue that the Russians are now dealing with right now. So this issue that Russia has no problem and it's just there to invade Europe is not there. On the other hand, the Europeans, in terms of military technologies, are far behind US. And US has been reluctant recently to share any of their technology with them because they're not paying their part, and it's not also necessary. They're not eager to advance their own military technologies. Otherwise, they would invest more into it. And they're not also committed to reindustrialization yet. We haven't heard speeches. We have not heard policies on that issue. And more importantly, when they're not committed to low-cost energy, cheap energy, how could you have growing economies? So when you see all these, you see the lack of all these policies, then when it comes to defense, it comes to become number 5 or 6. There are so many other important matters that they're not addressing yet. So then defense becomes number 5 or 6.
Looking ahead then, are we witnessing some sort of temporary dispute over the spending levels, or is this just the beginning of a long-term transformation when it comes to transatlantic alliance?
I think that you put your finger on it. I think there is going to be lots of transformation. You get, right now there is that ideological difference between US and Europe, whether it's on, again, I mentioned energy policy, economy, globalization, and there is also that political side of it, where countries, left of politics generally in Europe, they think if they go on anti-American or stance or American bashing or Trump bashing, they would get some votes by at elections. It's become a game for them by doing that. When they know that the greatest ally that they have is United States, and the United States has always been there, and they know that Europe is actually, when it comes to dispute resolution or peace negotiations, they are very weak. If you look at in the last 100 years, they've hardly managed to achieve any peace negotiation on their own without the involvement of US. US has been all the time there on any peace negotiation, and they've managed to secure the peace negotiation, while Europeans on their own, they've hardly managed to do any peace negotiation.
Thank you so much for your insights and your analysis there, and thank you for joining us. Today's two stories reveal a common challenge: maintaining security amid uncertainty, shifting power balances, and competing priorities. From Lebanon-Israel talks unfolding alongside military escalation to NATO's debate over defense burdens, security today is shaped not by diplomacy or military power alone, but by the complex interactions between both. Thank you for joining me here on In Focus, and stay tuned for more updates here on Qnews.